My, Hunter, you look positively stunning today.
Oh, you're starting to exhaust me with all these compliments.
Oh, be careful there, or I might have to mount my seikret and then give you a quest.
That's not where I thought that was going. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages,
Recently on the channel, we had a big deep dive into the standard hunter side statuses: blast, poison, paralysis, and sleep. Talked about the nuances of the statuses and everything unique about each one, all that. But there's a sort of companion topic to that, which is the more hidden statuses that we can apply as hunters within the game. The ones where you won't find any actual proper numbers for it anywhere in game, but they are mechanics that we can see at work within the gameplay itself, and they relate to numbers that we've gotten from data miners to give us deeper info on them with actually what's going on inside of the game. So today I want to talk about the stun status, the exhaust status, and the mount status, which is just a fancy way of describing mount buildup for getting mounts on monsters, as mounting monsters actually works on extremely similar functions to status buildup and application in Monster Hunter. All that said, we're going to talk about how these statuses work in relation to the monsters in Monster Hunter Wilds, where they are worth thinking about more than normal potentially, how each weapon is capable of applying them, which, to be clear, not every weapon can for 2 of these, but most have at least some method. And we'll talk about ways that you can maybe consider using this in your general playstyle or build setup too, and any skills that are particularly relevant to it too. First up then, let's talk about stun, or KO as it's sometimes called. The most general statement would be to say that doing blunt damage to the head of a monster will build stun damage until the initial threshold. Then when you reach that threshold, it will cause the monster to fall over and be unable to move for right around 12 seconds after the first time that you get a stun, signified by spinning stars over the head of the monster for the duration. After you apply your first stun, the amount of buildup required for the second stun will go up, so on and so forth until you reach the cap of threshold buildup requirement. As well, the length of the stun will go down each time that you get a stun on the same monster in the same quest. Specifically, you can look at the monster field guide to see star ratings for weakness to stun from each monster, and 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star weakness all correlate to a specific set of numbers shared by all monsters within the same weakness, which we know thanks to the data mined numbers that you can find at mhwilds.kiraniko.com. 1-star weakness to stun, which is held by duna, Ray Dao, Jin Dahaad, as well as Zoshia, and then also gore magala, has an opening threshold of 150 stun damage required for the first stun, which then goes up by 120 each time that you trigger it, to a maximum of 870 stun buildup if you just pile them on repeatedly. So the second stun would require 270 buildup, the third would take 390, and it of course resets your buildup to 0 whenever you trigger a stun. And this is why it's easy to trigger the first couple of stuns in a quest against the same monster, but gets harder and harder to get more and more throughout the same hunt. In comparison, the vast majority of the monsters are 2-star stun weakness, which is 120 base buildup for the first stun, then the threshold will go up by 100 for each stun that follows, up to a maximum of 720 required buildup at the high end. And then there are only 2 monsters in Wilds currently with 3-star stun weakness, which are Chotacabra and then also Lala Barina, who take 100 stun damage to build up the first knockdown, then the threshold goes up by 75 each time that you get another stun, up to a maximum of 550, so it's very, very easy to stun these 2 specific monsters. As well, regardless of weakness, all monsters will lower the stun buildup that you have earned against them by 5 every 10 seconds. This is known as stun decay. The threshold requirement will never reduce over time, so if you have to build 370 for your next stun, you will always have to build 370, but your own buildup towards that number does go down if you stop attacking. Though it's not a crazy amount, it's like 5 every 10 seconds, it's just enough to incentivize staying aggressive to trigger the status. That said, the main pattern that you may have noticed when I was talking about the actual star weaknesses is that every single important farm monster for the endgame, except for Arkveld specifically, and then also new Udra, are only 1-star stun weak because they decided that would be the way for most of the apexes as well as gore magala, which does make stun as a status a bit tougher to use than it otherwise would be in an environment with more weakness across the big boy monsters. But that's also not the biggest deal because you don't usually build for stun, so much as you just have stun damage that can happen in your build as a result of doing damage with your weapon. That said, there are skills that increase stun buildup, and while these can be intriguing, the math generally points to them not really being worth it, especially as they are weapon decoration skills in Wilds, which is a very important set of slots, and getting even 50% increased stun buildup, which you could get if you really dove into it, would only get you like 1 more stun at most per quest than you otherwise would get without the skills, just because of how the increased thresholds numbers work after each proc, the fact that it becomes harder to get more stuns every time you get another stun. Because once you get to the point that it's like 400 plus stun buildup for a stun, knowing that also all has to hit the head of the monster specifically, it gets pretty insane to get more stuns past a certain point. That said, I don't normally recommend investing into stun specifically with skills for pure efficiency, though there are some fun ways that you can incorporate a little bit through like putting like punishing draw specifically in, and like a longsword build for the ability to let a weapon that wouldn't normally be able to apply stun be able to on any of the special sheath attacks. But generally speaking, increasing your stun buildup in any way isn't really going to help you a whole lot over just having some stun buildup in general in your kit and knowing how and when to use it. Instead, for a proper list of what can apply stun buildup when hitting the head, for greatsword it is the kick attack, the side blow attack, and the shoulder tackle, with the amount increasing per charge level that you use the tackle at. Longsword has no attacks that build stun. Sword and shield is every single hit that you do with the shield itself, which includes falling bash from above, as well as part of the perfect rush combo, and the largest buildup is actually from upswing bash, which is the circle input after using your focus strike on a wound, the shield hit that sends you up into the air. So if you get a wound on a monster's head, this will apply a load of stun damage if you use this, especially as it then sends you up into the air to follow with falling bash, which is your next highest bit of stun damage. This is awesome for sword and shield, because as a weapon with mostly slashing damage, this gives you a really specific indicator of when a good time is to get your stun buildup in, as doing that combo will already get you most of the way to the first stun of a hunt, even against a 1-star weak monster, at which point you can use your shield combo to finish it off to hit the monster in the head and get that free knockdown. Then dual blades don't get any stun damage attacks, and then for hammer, every attack applies stun value because it is a blunt damage weapon inherently. But if you want to apply pure stun, you can get a good burst from the level 2 charged upswing, and your best consistent buildup is just upswing combo on repeat, which generally you'd be wanting to use and hit the head with anyways for hammer. For hunting horn, every hit you can do except for the hilt stab, which is slashing damage, and the echo waves that aren't specifically echo wave blunt, everything else will apply stun value. And specifically echo wave blunt does also apply stun value. The largest consistent amount of any hunting horn attack actually comes from echo wave blunt, so if you have echo wave blunt on the horn that you're using, spamming that melody with encores is your fastest way to build up a stun against the monster. Moving on to lance, all shield hits with this weapon will apply stun buildup, including the first hit of the dismount attack, victory thrust charge, and the first hit of the power clash finisher. But your best consistent buildup is just the basic shield attack and hitting the head of the monster with that on repeat, and then the extra bashes that you get from perfect guarding are also quite useful. For gunlance, nothing has stun values at all, and then for switch axe, no base parts of the moveset apply stun damage, but exhaust type phial does also count the phial damage as being blunt damage, which means exhaust phial explosions on the head can build stun, which is a neat bonus there too, even though there's only one exhaust damage switch axe in the game and it's not that great. For charge blade, same thing except with impact phial, as impact phial counts as blunt damage, so it gets stun buildup when hitting the head with impact phial explosions. Then for insect glaive, the kinsect mark attack and then any other attack that hits with the backside of your insect glaive will also do blunt damage. This will also apply a small amount of stun buildup as a result, specifically being one of the hits of descending thrust, part of the seikret mount attack, the dismount attack, and part of leaping thrust as well. But the big one by far is just having a blunt kinsect. If you have a blunt damage type kinsect, the kinsect will apply stun damage, and if you attack the monster's head in focus mode, the kinsect will also attack the head and build up those stuns for you as you do so. Then we have the bowguns, and the only ways to apply stun with either bowgun is with sticky ammo, more stun buildup applied per level of the ammo, or with exhaust ammo, which technically counts as blunt damage and so counts for stun too. Finally, we have bow, which used to be able to apply stun buildup to monsters with the arc shot, which rains little spike balls down from above, but these days that attack has a totally different function, no stun buildup anymore. Instead, the only way to apply stuns with bow in wilds is exhaust coating, which has the main purpose of making your arrows apply exhaust buildup, but the secondary bonus of making them count as applying stun damage too if you attack the head of a monster with exhaust coating. That's everything that you can do with stun then, so let's move on to our second more hidden status of the day, which is exhaust. exhaust. Exhaust is similar to stun in a number of ways, especially that it is generally tied to blunt damage as well, and is therefore applied by 9 out of 10 of the same attacks as that full list for stun, with some exceptions, notably either way. But then the actual functionality is totally different and requires explaining how monsters' cycles work to begin with. In general, a monster hunter monster will have 3 main states. A lot of them will have a 4th one: standard or neutral, which is how you find them at the start of a hunt; enraged, which generally happens after either time or damage or a combination of the two, and this will make their movements a bit faster, it will increase their damage a little bit, it will make them use more aggressive parts of their moveset more often, or just purposefully stick to the hunter more, being more aggressive, including chasing you around to other areas if you try to get away, which they won't do unless they are enraged. The 3rd state is fatigued or exhausted. When a monster is exhausted, you will see drool coming out of their mouth. They will move much slower. Most element-based monsters will lose part of their movesets, like an exhausted Rathian will try to fire a fireball and then nothing will come out. Same with Rathalos. And this just gives you a free period to deal extra damage essentially, and gives you a lot of time where the monster will be much less active than it normally would be. The 4th sort of state isn't really part of the cycle, it's a separate thing. Some monsters just have extra states where they can access new moves. That said, those 3 states work in a specific cycle. Every monster has essentially a hidden stamina bar. The attacks that they use cost stamina for them to use. If their stamina hits 0, they become exhausted. However, an enraged monster cannot become exhausted, even though an enraged monster will be using all of its strongest attacks and using as much stamina as possible. So if a monster becomes enraged, then has its stamina hit 0 after the fact, it won't become exhausted until the enraged timer ends, delaying the effect. What exhaust does as a player-facing status then is it works like any other status on the surface. You apply buildup up to a threshold, and then an effect will trigger. In this case, when you trigger an exhaust proc, it will remove a portion of the monster's stamina, pushing them closer to that fatigued or exhausted state faster than you would be able to without applying exhaust damage. This can actually be really good for getting you extra downtime on the monster. Usually you won't get more than 1 exhaust or fatigue on a quest unless you're using a very low damage build, so the quest is really long. And the main reason that exhaust has been considered not very important generally in the past is simply that this mechanic doesn't affect elder dragons. And usually the monsters that people end up farming in the endgame of a monster hunter game tend to be elder dragons, so it doesn't get talked about much. But in Wilds specifically, we're in an interesting spot where there isn't even a single elder dragon, at least not technically, so all of the top farm monsters are able to be affected by exhausts. All that said, like I mentioned before, it works like the rest of the statuses on the surface, to the point that you can even see the weaknesses of each monster to exhaust in the field guide as well. But unlike the other statuses, it is far more simple. All guardian monsters, including Zoshia, anything that is technically listed as a construct as its monster type, are fully immune to exhaust. Every other monster in the game is 2-star exhaust weakness, which translates to 225 buildup to trigger an exhaust proc and chunk a bunch of stamina off of the monster. Then the threshold will go up by 75 for each successive proc in a hunt, up to a maximum of 900 buildup threshold. This means that exhaust isn't easy to trigger to begin with, but the actual amount that it goes up in between each proc isn't crazy. So getting some exhaust into your build isn't terrible, neither is knowing which of your attacks can apply exhaust, and that's where the next part of this comes in, because Stamina Thief is a skill that exists to increase your exhaust damage in general. Again, this is unfortunately a weapon skill, so it takes up a very important slot for damage, and I wouldn't recommend going for it specifically for that reason, most of all, but if it does happen to be on a weapon that you're going to use anyways, like a crafted weapon, that's not bad. And this doesn't mean that exhaust buildup in general is bad. It just means that I think you'll get a lot more value from knowing what attacks apply exhaust and how, and then just using actual damage skills rather than trying to boost your exhaust damage. Unlike stun, you don't have to hit the head to apply exhaust. Any part of the monster will do, but like stun, this does have a decay on the actual buildup, which lowers the amount of buildup that you have applied by 5 every 10 seconds. So again, it's not a big decay, just enough to incentivize you keeping up the aggression on the monster to apply your exhaust procs. As for which attacks even apply exhaust for each weapon then, for Greatsword it's the exact same list as stun, except that kick doesn't have exhaust buildup specifically, then longsword has no exhaust buildup attacks, sword and shield, again, all of the shield hits, but the best exhaust buildup specifically is from the 3-hit shield combo, interestingly to mention, especially as it differs from the highest stun damage option. Then for dual blades, there's no exhaust applying attacks. For hammer, every attack applies exhaust because it's tied to blunt damage, and the best attacks for applying exhaust with hammer is just doing the upswing combo on repeat to a monster. For hunting horn, it's the same list as for stun damage. Everything applies exhaust except for hilt stab and the echo waves that are not echo wave blunt, and echo wave blunt has the highest consistent exhaust buildup. So again, if you want to apply exhaust with your hunting horn, horn, echo wave blunt with encores is a great way to do so. Then we have the lance. Again, all shield hits apply exhaust, exact same as for stun, and the buildup is pretty similar to stun 2, where the basic shield attack is your best choice if you're specifically looking to trigger exhaust. Then gunlance has no exhaust triggering attacks. Switch axe, like with stun, gets no inherent exhaust buildup attacks, but of course exhaust phial explosions do cause exhaust buildup, which is a unique way of applying it too. And then for charge blade, similarly no inherent exhaust buildup moves, but the impact phials will apply exhaust buildup when hitting the monster. For insect glaive, it's the same as for stun value again, any hit with the back side of the glaive, but the majority of exhaust buildup will come from using a blunt kinsect and fighting alongside it in focus mode. For bowguns, sticky ammo applies some exhaust, and then there's of course exhaust ammo specifically as well. And then finally bow, which has no inherent exhaust buildup, but again, you can put exhaust coating onto a bow, which will cause exhaust buildup on hit when used. Then finally today, let's talk about mounting and mount damage buildup, as it is essentially just a hidden status. This doesn't have any weakness or star ratings or anything in the monster field guide, but we still have the thresholds, we know the actual numbers, and we know what they increase by because this has been data mined, so we know what's going on. Every monster in Monster Hunter Wilds, except for 3, have the exact same numbers when it comes to mounting. This is 75 mount buildup required for the first mount, which is like 1, 2, maybe 3 good aerial attacks on these smaller weapons, but then the threshold goes up by 230 for each successive mount. So the second mount would be 305 buildup instead of 75, so on and so forth until the maximum threshold of 995, which is quite high. And this is why it's really easy to get your first mount. It's not even too bad to get your second mount, but then it becomes really tough to get anything more than that unless you're specifically aiming to. This threshold applies to every monster in the game except for duna, Ray Dao, and then new Udra specifically too, who all have slightly higher mounting thresholds, specifically being 90 mount damage for the initial mount, then the threshold goes up by 270. So the second mount on these 3 monsters would take 360 buildup total, and this continues until the maximum threshold of 1170, which is extremely high. And this basically just means that all monsters in the game are equally mountable except for these 3, which, interesting to note, is all of the apexes except for dahaad for whatever reason. Just an interesting choice from the devs, really. Unlike exhaust and stun in the more normal statuses, however, there is no decay on mount buildup. The buildup that you do will stick forever until you actually hit the threshold and get a mount, so there is no time pressure to try and get a mount to happen, the same way as there is for all the other statuses. As for applying mount damage, generally speaking, any attack that counts as aerial will apply mount damage. Any attack you do after jumping off of your seikret, after jumping off of a ledge, any attack you can do mid-air while you are falling, or any wall-running attacks that many weapons have, slide attacks or dismount attacks off the seikret as well. Any ones that are specifically worth noting for being unusual include any aerial sneak attack. Aerial sneak attacks do not do mount damage despite being an aerial attack technically. Then for sword and shield, jumping slash does an unusual amount of mount damage compared to damage, and this is a really good mount damage building option if you want to mount specifically as a result. Falling bash does no mount buildup despite being an aerial attack, and plunging thrust does technically have mount buildup, but it's so minuscule you will rarely, if ever, mount off of plunging thrust. For lance, you can do jump attacks if you do the dashing sprint maneuver off of a ledge, and these actually do mount buildup damage as well, which matters quite a bit because lance specifically has a particularly high damage mount finisher attack. Then for insect glaive, the vast majority of your aerial moveset will apply mount buildup, making you extra good at causing mounts compared to other weapons, but interestingly, descending thrust specifically does not apply mount buildup despite being an attack that you can use from the air. Then for bowgun and bow, only the jumping melee hits count for mount buildup, nothing else does, not even the jumping range shots, only the melee hits. There are ways to boost your mounting potency with skills, mostly the food skill, rider meal, and the related group skill as well for mounting, but as I mentioned earlier when talking about the thresholds, mount threshold increases such a large amount each time that you are unlikely to get even one bonus mount with skills active than you would without it playing the exact same way. So I'd say the main takeaway from this part is to always make sure that you get that first mount in a hunt, unless you're like speedrunning, as obviously you do less damage while mounting, but after a successful mount ends, the monster gets knocked down, so it makes for more comfortable hunts too. So yes, it is technically a time loss, a damage loss to mount the monster, but that only matters if you're someone who doesn't care about comfort at all, so that's the main trade-off. That just about does it for today, then everyone. A full breakdown of stun, exhaust, and mount buildup as much more obscure statuses within the game that still have some concrete numbers behind them and information attached to them. I don't know how much this will or won't change how you play or how you make your builds or plan your hunts, hunts, but personally, I'm of the mind that the more information you have, the more options you have to work with, and the more you actually get to make an informed choice. So I'm happy to talk about these things and get that information out there just a little bit more. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and then most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.